Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 24th of April. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather with us tonight. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information at 1-800-472-0391. That, of course, is the Alaska Weather Information Line. It's always on for your forecast needs. And, of course, we're online at weather.gov/Alaska. You can click on that page one time and be taken to your local forecast office, whether that's in Fairbanks, Juneau, or in Anchorage. And you can also find links there to the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit and the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, which will be helping you with your breakup needs and concerns as we go through the spring flooding and meltdown season. If you can't find what you're looking for, as always, I encourage you to use that email that you see right there on the screen, david.snider@noaa.gov. That's your direct access to me online, and I'm happy to help you in any way I possibly can. Here's a look at the hazardous weather around the region tonight. No warnings, watches, or advisories out for southeastern Alaska, but we do know that around the Chilkoot and White Pass region, especially White Pass, we're going to see the winds coming up as we get into the next 24 hours or so. Probably not reaching warning level status, but you're going to notice the winds coming up, as you always do in this kind of weather situation. A very progressive pattern working across from the Bering and into the northern Gulf. And as a front is approaching south central Alaska, you can't see it under the red dot, but there's a high wind warning that will continue through the remainder of the afternoon into the early evening for the Anchorage area, as winds coming off the hillside have been pushing through most of the day. And of course, there has been some damage with that and power flickering off here and there. I'll look for that to improve this evening, but a look up north shows that high wind warnings will still be in effect for the Deltana and Tanana Flats region, as well as the Alaska Range there. Gusts in the 80 to 90 mile an hour range, not impossible. In fact, wouldn't be surprised to see some of those gusts continue through the evening hours, especially around the Healy and Denali area, and then eastward through some of the cutoffs as well, up through the passes there. Watch for some of the stronger gusts to be found in those regions. So if you haven't left south central yet and you're planning to drive northward and you've got the Winnebago, you've got a high profile vehicle, you've got a semi-tractor trailer, it's going to be a rough night to do some of the driving through some of those really windy spots that you know very well, better than anybody else. So maybe tonight would be the night to give it a couple hours and let the winds settle out just a little bit. Up north, you can see a broad area of yellow on the map. Those are wind advisories all the way from Ambler and the upper Noatak Valley, all the way eastward the upper Yukon Valley, Eagle and Northway through Fairbanks, Tanana, and McGrath. Wind gusts there will continue through the evening and overnight hours and will probably stay windy through a good part of the rest of the week, maybe at least until Thursday. A lot of channeled terrain will be suffering the most. And with this weather pattern kind of going through and then resetting and doing the whole thing over again this week, we can expect that we'll continue to be under a fairly windy pattern and setup for, again, really probably Thursday, maybe even into Friday for some areas up north. Now, this was created about a week ago. This is the spring flood potential outlook. We're going to talk about breakup now. And the red areas in this case were areas that we saw higher than normal snowpack. And that stretches all the way from the Seward Peninsula through the central and middle Yukon into the Copper River Valley. And these areas saw a little more snow than normal. And because of that, these are the areas that will probably have slightly higher possibilities of seeing a little more flooding. Now, there haven't been too many areas of highlighted concern just yet. The most recent was the area around North Pole and Fairbanks. So that dot was made yellow simply because that the level of water coming through might need to activate the chain of flood control measures, which we understand makes the North Pole area have some groundwater issues. So that's the only reason that's highlighted yellow around the Fairbanks region. But we can now cut over to the real deal. This is the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center breakup map monitoring page. And if you go over to APRFC right now online, if you go to weather.gov/APRFC, you'll find this exact map here. And you can click on it, you can zoom in, you can save that and do what you want with it. But right now we're seeing some changes there around the Tanana River and areas up around the Nenana and the Chena. So already seeing some regions there that are at least in some open to mostly open status there, and also not real sure about some of the rivers coming out of the western Alaska Range, but most areas there across the interior are still looking at ice covered, and the same goes for southwest, but it's not going to take a whole lot longer to start to see some changes there for many other places downstream. So watch for changes here first, and we're already seeing that upstream of Fairbanks at this point, and very close to Fairbanks for that matter. So pay attention, and anytime you want, weather.gov/APRFC, Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center for short. Again, that's the Alaska breakup map for your day today. Here's a look at the satellite picture. And wow, a lot of wind moving through in the region of south central today. The low pressure system is reorganizing here across the north. We've got another center of low pressure starting to strengthen here across the southern Bering Sea. And all of this is wrapping in on itself and pushing a front through south central, constricting the flow of wind over the mountains in the Chugach and making it flow through those nooks and crannies in the mountain passes. And when it does, it comes bursting through just like a dam break of water. Same thing's happening with the wind. The two forces act very similarly. And in this case, we've had 80 to 90 mile-an-hour gusts at times across some of the higher terrain in Anchorage, and some of that occasionally is trying to make its way down below. It has not been that strong, as best we know, at lower terrain where most of us live. Up north, the wind is making it through the Alaska Range as well, and into the central and eastern interior, expecting that to continue as we head through tonight and tomorrow, and certainly into the middle part of the week. In the meantime, this is also bringing a healthy dose of rainfall to north and eastern sections of southeast. Expect that to pick up in the coming days. You can see on the current surface chart, low pressure out west is down to about 972, 973 there, with the frontal boundary working through the Kenai Peninsula and the Anchorage region late this afternoon. One wave already ahead of that, helping to squeeze out some rain around the northern part of the Gulf, around Yakutat, and heading its way toward Cross Sound very quickly. Blowing snow up north, areas of fog around the Chukchi coast as well. Out across the west, you can see the speckled nature of the satellite picture. That should be a clue. There's some big cold air out there, and as that moves into southwestern Alaska, precipitation for the rest of the week is really going to focus on at least some snow, maybe all snow at times. You'll see that again tonight out across southwest, all the way into the Yukon Delta and Norton Sound, looking for a rain-snow mix there. That low pressure system is really going to drive a decent southerly flow well north into western Alaska through a good part of the week. A front working across the interior and through the central and eastern Gulf tonight will keep the wind going through the region. The wind should settle down in south central after that front passes through your area this evening. Up north, it's snow for the north coast, and notice that as we get into your Wednesday, low pressure really doesn't move all that much. It's going to stay put in that same area through most of the mid to late week. 986 millibars. It is filling in a little bit for your Wednesday. High pressure sitting south and west of Haida Gwaii at 1,029 millibars, helping to keep that rain channeled into southeast. Periods of rain and snow across the northern Gulf. Rain showers pretty much down the Alaska Peninsula through Bristol Bay and the central and eastern chain. Breezy conditions at times across southwestern Alaska, but again, that pressure gradient's really going to focus those winds across the interior, drawing a lot of that easterly flow toward low pressure out there across the Bering Sea. As we get into Thursday, notice another factor, the low pressure system's reorganizing here north of the Bering Sea with warmer air developing once again. This will allow colder air to drop in behind it, and we're going to reset this whole pattern as we go into Thursday night and into Friday with high pressure briefly over the Gulf at 1,025 millibars. Once this is in place and low pressure drops into place, we're going to squeeze this gradient one more time as we go into Thursday and Friday, and that means another round of wind and rain for the Gulf and possibly south central, and with a lingering boundary here across parts of southeast. Now this may waver a little bit here and there, but along this boundary, wherever it sets up, it's really going to want to focus that rain into your region. So if that's over Juneau, it's going to be a really wet end of the week. If it's a little bit further south toward Cake and Klawock and Craig, it could be a little wetter end for you as well. So this positioning of this lingering front is going to have a really big difference on what happens around southeast, it looks like, for Thursday and Friday. And a hint out west, you can see yet another wave behind that with some brief ridging in between. So, one right after the other, it looks like, for the rest of this week. Okay, that's your weather pattern. Let's take a look at temperatures. Here we go. As we go into tonight and early tomorrow morning, upper 30s and low 40s for many parts of southeast. Not too hard to say that most areas in the Panhandle are going to stay above freezing tonight, and you can see that warmth spreading all the way around in the north and western sections of the Gulf. We start to see those cooler temperatures once you get north of Ammonok and into Norton Sound, but even there in the Unalakleet, temps are still hovering at or above freezing, and you get up toward Nome, and now we're below freezing in the Kotzebue Sound region. Low to mid-teens for the north slope. The interior also looking fairly mild, low to mid-30s there. Healy, a little bit colder and certainly windy tonight, 28 degrees, low 40s down the Parks Highway. Prince William Sound looking at temperatures back in the mid to upper 30s. High temperatures tomorrow with wind moving through and off the mountains, no question about it. The interior is going to have a very mild Wednesday. Upper 40s and lower 50s for you, and looks fairly warm across south central too. The Cook Inlet region back in the mid 40s. 48 for Kodiak, upper 40s, low to mid 50s in fact for southern parts of southeast. St. Paul and St. George about 40 degrees. The YK Delta in the mid to upper 30s, maybe even 40 degrees for some in Bristol Bay, about 34 in Nome. Overnight lows Thursday morning, teens and 20s for many in the north, low to mid 30s for parts of southwest, south central, mid to upper 30s there. Kodiak 37. As you get into Haines, looks like Skagway, upper 30s, lower to 40s, maybe around Sitka, down toward Ketchikan and Annette. 33 in St. Paul and about 37 in Sandpoint. High temperatures there tomorrow, or Thursday, should be back in the lower 40s. Kodiak's at 46, mid 40s for South Central. The interior still pretty mild, upper 40s to about 50 degrees around Fort Yukon to Fairbanks. Norton Sound in the upper 30s, Nome 34, Kotzebue looking at 34 degrees, 30 in Shishmaref, and around Barrow about 25. Many in Southeast could see temps in the mid to upper 50s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And moving on to flying weather, you'll notice IFR conditions will start out around the north and western slope as well as the Brooks Range and a large part of the northern Bering Sea. Remember, our area of low pressure sitting just outside of the Gulf of Vanadier in the northern Bering Sea. And wave after wave will continue working its way from west to east across the region. You can also see one of those waves creating IFR across northern parts of southeast, Copper River Valley into the Wrangell-St. Elias region, with MVFR lingering around south central and IFR continuing around the Alaska range, and some of that clearing up a little bit as we get into the afternoon out west. But most of southwest, most of the Bering Sea under MVFR conditions through most of your Wednesday, with IFR spreading a little bit further east into the northern parts of the Panhandle around the Chilkoot and White Pass region, across Sound all the way up toward Yakutat, and southward almost to, well, probably right about to Sitka as well. The south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range will see hit and miss IFR throughout your Wednesday afternoon, and so will the Bering Strait around St. Lawrence Island out toward Nome and eastern sections of Norton Sound down to St. Matthew. For Wednesday morning, expect IFR across the north and western slope again, the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, Adigan and Attuvic Pass, as well as the Norton Sound region, the Yukon Delta to Eetolen Strait and the Bering Strait itself. Chilkoot and White Pass will start out with IFR and then out across the central and eastern Gulf, hit and miss around south central, MVFR fairly widespread there. Really not a huge improvement as we get into Thursday afternoon, still looking at IFR conditions across the west, and MVFR fairly widespread across the western interior as well as south central and the eastern Gulf, with IFR conditions lingering just out of range of the Dixon entrance and also across the western chain. Here's a look at your past conditions in detail then. For Wednesday, IFR conditions are expected to hold around Attuvic Pass and Adigan Pass in the morning with some improvements throughout the afternoon. We'll see that repeat again on Thursday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see IFR conditions as we go throughout your day. Some improvement may be possible in the afternoon there, and for Rainy Pass as well. Windy Pass looks like it'll hold around IFR through most of the day on Wednesday. Same goes for Isabel Pass. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see some improvement as the day goes on toward MVFR. Tanita Pass also looking at marginal conditions. Portage Pass should be marginal throughout most of the day, and Chilkoot and White Pass expected to hold at IFR really most of your Wednesday, and again, maybe some improvements on Thursday. Wednesday morning freezing levels, we've got a pretty decent surge of warm air coming up the eastern Gulf. You can see levels as high as 4 to even 10,000 feet in the region there. The 2,000-foot freezing line stretches all the way out toward Homer and Kodiak, the surface freezing line, indicating a large chunk of northwestern, central, and southeastern parts of Alaska's mainland anyway. It will be below freezing in the morning, and we still have some lingering warm area across the Beaufort Seacoast and the Canadian provinces. Icing potential along with that is still pretty high up there, looking at isolated to moderate levels of icing potential anywhere above 6,000 feet across the north, above 4,000 feet a little bit south and east of that low pressure center, and then across the Copper River Valley above 6,000 feet. You can see it really falls off as you move into southeastern Alaska, but there will be some icing potential there on top of some really big winds. The turbulence will probably be your greatest factor in all of your decision making tomorrow. The jet stream potential shows us low pressure center is right here around the Bering Strait, and with that the west and northwesterly winds really take a dive across the western Bering, but you see the speeds really aren't that tremendous, only about 75 to 95 knots. The really big push comes across the northern Pacific and into the Gulf around 130 knots, and then builds into a ridge which quickly drops back into the lower 48. We also have another circulation here across the central and eastern Pacific with winds around 50 to 95 knots. So this is the big player in town. Underneath that, the low pressure center just west of Savunga, 30 knots on the north side, 20 to 30 knots on the south side. And again, really not a tremendous amount of wind showing up, at least in the models. The highest I saw was around 40 to maybe 55 knots. So not terribly impressive, at least for this period in time. A southwesterly flow across the Gulf is fairly widespread, 30 to 45 knots there. Otherwise, southerlies really for the mainland are the rule. You can see not a big change there, 3,000 feet. Wind speeds also not horribly significant, 30 to 40 knots tops, and then across south central, 30 to 45. South and westerlies coming across the Gulf steady at 20 to 30 there, with a little bit of a deviation up around the Beaufort Seacoast, about 25 to 35 knots. So what about turbulence tomorrow? Will it be better than today? Probably, yes. It does look like we'll at least, though, have widespread, considerable moderate across the west coast, across the Alaska Range, and into the interior across the upper Yukon Valley. Southeast right now, not a huge threat, just south of the Dixon entrance, some chop there below 4,000 feet. So don't be surprised to get some isolated severe reports out there, and hopefully they're not coming from you, of course, but we do appreciate those reports. And also across the west in the central chain, looking at levels reaching considerable moderate there below 4,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation forecast. Back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service with another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining me today are not just one, but two people, both with the last name Stevens, which is even more fun, but no relation. We have Eric Stevens from Dehne and George Stevens, who is a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Awesome. And today you guys brought a really cool toy, or I should say tool, with you. It's a sandbox, but why are you guys working on a sandbox?
Well, it's part of our senior design project, and we were approached by AKwx to build this for them. They had a proof of concept that they developed about a year ago, I think, and they wanted a more robust version that they could pack onto a plane and take places, and it's a handy learning tool for kids and adults.
So you're a mechanical engineering student. You've built a traveling sandbox for the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, EPSCoR, and Dehne's facilitated this. But why do we need a traveling sandbox?
Well, the prototype was such a big hit that they decided they wanted another one, actually two, that they could that would be easier to travel with, you know, possibly marketable even.
Okay, so this is a traveling sandbox. It's got a lot of bits and pieces and a computer hooked up to it. What is the computer doing with the sand?
The computer actually uses a Kinect sensor to read the topography of the sand or the shape of the sand, and then the computer translates that into information which it projects using a projector onto the sand, showing topographical lines and which is representative of the shape of the sand.
Okay, so this is a live mapping tool?
Yeah. It's interactive. As you're moving your hands through it, it is actively following and changing the lines to fit what you're doing.
That sounds like something I could have in my backyard.
Yep.
It'd be a lot of fun. So you guys had to change the design a little bit to make this more Alaska-fied, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, how'd you do that?
Well, the original was made out of basically lumber and Simpson strong tie type stuff, and we rebuilt it to make it lighter and basically more transportable. We can pack it down to a fairly small size, and it can be loaded onto a plane and flown anywhere in the state. Which
you guys did today. And you have plans to take this in other places of Alaska, right?
Yep, we're actually going to be headed down to Homer with it later today.
Okay, very good. Eric, how does this fit into science learning around Alaska?
Well, you know what? I think it is a tool and it is a toy, and it brings out a smile from an 8-year-old and the smile from a 48-year-old with that inner 8-year-old wanting to get out. The sandbox, it's an interactive learning tool that teaches us how topography in the 3 dimensions is related to, say, a 2-dimensional map. More about that later. Just like George was saying, it's got a Kinect sensor, not just for video games anymore. It can sense out the lay of the land there, feeds that information in the computer. Computer identifies that, sends a signal to a projector to send topographic lines to map over that lumpy ground. So you get a 3-dimensional topo map out of it. And my favorite thing about it, this is the thing that stops people at the trade show, they stop at your booth and don't leave, is that you run your hand through that sandbox and it responds in real time. It remaps the topography as you get to be Mr. Tectonic Plate Drifter there. You can make things how you want. Well, what if we made a really high mountain here and a low valley there, and the lines adjust to what you did? It's a learning tool because it shows you that connection between these 2-dimensional topo lines and what's really out in Alaska. And Alaska's a place with all kinds of topography. You know, we're from the Great Plains, where topo maps tend to be just like blank pieces of paper, but Alaska is particularly gifted in this regard, and this tool helps us, I think, learn more about our state, really.
Absolutely. And so this is going to enhance STEM learning, the science, technology, engineering, and math in many different locations around Alaska. Then this would be something that kids and teachers can get their hands on.
It sure is. And I mentioned the it's like flypaper at a booth that, or at the Science Potpourri when we had Greg's original version of this sandbox, and that one was made out of scraps of wood, and it was a prototype. But even that one, before it had some of the refinements that George and crew have made for this newer, upscaled, maybe a 2.0 version of the sandbox, even that one was so attractive to people. It just demonstrated that this has potential to be a learning tool, an outreach tool, an education tool that now is portable and can go places in Alaska. Of course, there's only one sandbox, can't be everywhere at once, but hopefully it gets out there, gets the word out about EPSCoR and what science is being done here for Alaskans.
All right, that sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to get my hands in the sand and try this out for myself. We're going to demonstrate this here in our next segment of Alaska Weather Facts, but before we go, we want to remind you that EPSCoR, which is a new acronym for me now, but I'm going to remember this because you can follow them on Facebook and Twitter, and I invite you to do that. Alaska EPSCoR is also something that facilitates science learning at the University of Alaska around the state, and that stands for Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. So check that out, and make sure you tune in tomorrow because we're going to have the next version where we actually get our hands in the sand and check out how this works and demonstrates that topography. So for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you again next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time for your marine update. We'll start with sea ice as always, updated on this 24th of April, and you'll notice the sea ice pack, the higher concentration, still located up north and close to the coast, but with an offshore flow pushing a lot of this ice out of the sounds, we'll continue to see movement of that pack generally from east to west, so don't be surprised to run into areas where we're developing polynyas across the Chukchi Sea, and certainly in the Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound areas where some of that higher pack ice again is moving generally from east to west, and it's getting warmer, so a lot of this edge is eroding as well. There is still just a little bit of marginal ice in the very northern end of Cook Inlet as well. Don't be surprised to see a little bit of that floating through, but perhaps after this week that may be gone. For the latest updates on the forecast and your sea ice edge, head to weather.gov/anchorage/ice. On to southeast now. It's going to be blustery up north with the front blowing through. Southerlies are going to pick up across the Lynn Canal, 40 knots with 8-foot seas there, 20 knots further south through Cross Sound and Stevens Passage and out across the outer coast, anywhere from 20 to 35 knots with seas picking up from about 10 to 13 to 14 feet across the northern Gulf outside of Yakutat. Don't be surprised to run into stronger gusts there, but things may settle down a little bit more as you get into Thursday. A little bit more of a north and westerly change though, 15 to 25 knots coming down the coast south of Sitka, 25 knots with a 10-foot sea. Southerlies continue in the Lynn Canal, 4-foot seas expected there. Northwesterlies for Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait, 15 to 20 knots with 3 to 4-foot seas as you get into Thursday. For Wednesday, southerlies inside of Prince William Sound, 15 knots and 3-foot seas there, looking at seas at 13 to 14 feet as you head down past Resurrection Bay and into the Barren Islands. Southerlies will continue through Cook Inlet as well, 20 to 25 knots, expecting 7 to 9-foot seas, the highest of those across the western Barren Islands just before you get into Shelikof Strait on Wednesday. For Thursday, seas and winds diminish just a little bit more, but you get more of a southwesterly bend there across the northern Gulf. Looking for small seas and light winds inside of Prince William Sound. A little bit of a break on Thursday there with southerlies across Cook Inlet. 15 to 20 knots, expecting 5 to 6-foot seas for your Thursday there. For Wednesday, inside of Bristol Bay, southerlies inside of the bay at 10 knots, looking for 14-foot seas there as you head down the coast with a 30-knot flow from the south and west. Southwesterlies coming up the northern western Gulf, 25 to 30 with 15 to 20-knot seas. In Shelikof Strait, up to 9-foot seas with southerlies continuing there to 25 knots for your Wednesday. Look for some improvement on Thursday in all areas, 15 to 25 all the way from Shelikof Strait down through the Bering Sea coast, and 20 knots, pretty much status quo across the north and western Gulf. 11 to 12-foot seas expected on that 20-knot wind from the south and west. For the chain, a broad westerly flow will continue. Low pressure sitting up here across the northern Bering. That's not going to change much through the end of the week. So you're on the westerly side of the storm. A 25 to 30 knot flow will continue across the Pacific coast with 15 to 20 foot seas there and 11 to 12 foot seas across most of the Bering Sea coast, with some of the stronger winds still holding around Okolski and Unalaska. As we get into Thursday, really very little change. You can see some higher seas out here over the open water, so if you are heading out, do plan on seeing some of the seas coming up. This is going to put us into the about 15 to 20 foot range, probably a little smaller than that, I guess, but the scale would indicate somewhere between about 13 and 17 feet in most areas there north of the chain. So keep that in mind if you're heading out. For Wednesday, west and southwesterlies continue. You can see some of those higher seas there north of St. Matthew to St. Lawrence Island as well. Most of the ice is leaving fairly quickly in those regions. Seas ranging between about 8 to 12 feet, and as we get into Thursday, notice a west and southwesterly flow about 25 to 30 knots. Some higher seas coming into the Pribilofs there. You'll see on the map anyway, 11-foot seas with a westerly flow at 30 knots on Thursday. Wednesday, easterlies over the ice at 25 knots, and offshore flow continues there. Some seas opening up there inside of Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound, 25 to 30 knots with 9-foot seas inside the Bering Strait, becoming 8-foot seas on a southwesterly flow on Thursday. And overall, an east and southeasterly flow 10 to as high as 25 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound for your Thursday afternoon. Recapping tonight's weather, it's wind. Wind is the big story tonight. High wind warnings will expire on the Anchorage area as the front continues to move away from the region, but we are expecting high wind warnings for the Alaska range and wind advisories north of that into the interior. So if you're driving a high-profile vehicle this evening along the Parks Highway between Fairbanks and Anchorage and you're watching, you might want to just lay off for tonight, at least let it settle down a little bit. Winds are going to stay up in the interior probably through tonight and tomorrow, and we expect that winds will still be an issue as we get toward the end of the week. It may not be as blustery all the time, but gusts to about 40 miles per hour should be fairly widespread through the Tanana Valley and certainly through some of the higher gaps and passes there as you're moving about, so be extra careful. Rain will continue to fall and focus on southeast, with another wave of this weather working into the west coast as we approach Thursday and once again Friday and Saturday. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.